Joining us now is Congressman Lloyd Doggett, a senior member of the House Ways and Means Committee. He's a Democrat from Texas. Also joining us is Mark Major. He's a former Director of Research, Analytics, and Statistics at the IRS and a former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Tax Policy. He's currently with the Tax Policy Center. And Congressman Doggett, I want to start with you. It looks like the New York State Legislature may be giving you some help, as well as the help you got last night from the New York Times.
Well, of course, the report in the New York Times shows what a loser this president is, that he demonstrated in business about the same negotiating skill he's shown recently with the North Koreans, and it points up why we really need these returns, because there's so many lies that are here and so many questions about how Americans can have confidence in the tax system if the president is not doing his part and has not done his part. As far as the New York action, I think it's important. I'm pleased they're proceeding, but there is other information, the working papers, the auditing, the questions about whether he was even under audit, that we need to get directly with Chairman Neal's important request under Article 6103 or Section 6103.
Mark, actually, I want to call you Mr. Secretary, because the last time we talked, it was in your office at the Treasury years ago when you were the Assistant Secretary for Tax Policy. So many issues to deal with. First of all, I learned from you in the New York Times reporting that your quotes about what IRS transcripts are. I actually didn't know about these documents that the IRS has. What are who gets those documents? The New York Times could have obtained those documents from sources other than just the IRS, correct?
So those documents are available to taxpayers. They can request the transcript from the IRS. It's basically a summary of your tax return. So some people may not keep their tax returns and may request a transcript. Sometimes lenders request a transcript. So if you go to get a mortgage, the mortgage company wants to see what your earnings are. They may ask you to request a transcript and give it to them.
It's kind of a simpler set of documents that can show many more years of tax information than just a single stack of a tax return.
Well, the transcript shows 1 year at a time.
Yeah.
But it's a short version. Exactly.
Yeah.
You can get a bunch of them and put them all together.
And the accuracy of those transcripts?
So if you think about the time period under question here is the mid-1980s to the mid-1990s. Most people filed on paper in those days. The IRS had an army of people at service centers who would transcribe those returns and put them into machine-readable form. And they typically were key punched twice, either twice by the same person or two different people key punching it. And that helped ensure that they're accurate, because they were the electronic version of all the data that they had on taxpayers. So it was used for almost every purpose.
Congressman Doggett, the deadline has come for Chairman Neal to decide which way to proceed. He has indicated he will decide soon, within the next day or two. Is it most likely going to be Chairman Neal simply suing the Treasury Secretary for basically violating the law that requires the handing over of the Trump tax returns?
Well, it's his decision, but I believe that is the most expeditious path. It's a path that you had outlined on your program by Professor George Yen, an expert in that area, just as Mark is in his, someone we would all turn to for advice on this. That will allow us to move directly, expeditiously, without a subpoena. At a later time, it may be, and it's not inconsistent, to go ahead and subpoena them also. And of course, just as Adam Schiff told you about the work of his committee, there is the matter of inherent contempt power with Congress. If we just have them running out the clock, I think we need to invoke that inherent contempt power and use it with regard to this issue.
And Mark, you have so much experience at the Joint Tax Committee and as the Assistant Secretary for Tax Policy at the IRS. When you look at what the New York Times was reporting from those transcripts over those 10 years, including this very sudden and mysterious mountain of interest income of $52 million that just kind of, in tax information terms, comes from out of nowhere and disappears. So there's some mountainous asset that's throwing off $50 million in interest that wasn't there before, wasn't there later. What do you see when you read all that information?
So you look at this, and basically you expect real estate investors to occasionally have losses.
Especially on depreciation.
Exactly right.
losses, right.
Exactly. So they depreciate the property. That's part of the investment thing. You get a loss, you sell the property, you hope to get a gain. What's different here is the string of losses altogether. And when debt was forgiven, there's supposed to be income taken into account then. That doesn't show up anywhere during this decade.
Oh, that's a really important point. So if I owe $1 million, and at some point I simply default on the paying of the $1 million, and the creditor, the bank, whoever that is, says, you know what, forget it. That's actually $1 million of income to me.
Yeah, and if you had a student loan, same thing.
Yeah, and none of that, so he seems to be having debts forgiven, and none of that's being declared as income.
Right, so I think the story here is really there's a lot more questions than we have answers to. You pointed to the interest income, which is a question, not obvious where it comes from or where it went, but also having all these losses and no corresponding income when debt was forgiven also is another mystery.
You both know that I could continue this discussion for the next couple of hours, so we're going to have to do it on another night. Congressman Lloyd Doggett, Mark Major, thank you both very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.